Welcome to the Ultimate Ukraine channel. In the last 10 pages of the nearly 300-day war diary in Eastern Europe, the indisputable victories of Ukraine against Russia are overflowing. This book, in which the blood of brave soldiers is used as ink, tells us many heroic stories on the way to freedom every day. On the last page of the book, it is written that Crimea will be liberated by Ukraine and the world will enter a brand new era, but there are many pages that we need to read on the path. Let's dive into new fresh pages where the war is lively from the front and the hot developments full of Russia's desperation and doomsday. And let's subscribe to our channel for new fresh pages every day. After 3 successful counterattacks, the Ukrainian Armed Forces is preparing for the 4th one with the coming of winter. The success of the Kherson counterattack gave the Ukrainian Armed Forces great encouragement. However, we are aware that every minute that Ukraine loses can turn into a disadvantage. It seems clear that time is running out for Ukraine. If you remember, the Russian Army, which entered Ukraine in February, met with the mud of Ukraine and floundered. Taking advantage of this confusion, the Ukrainian Armed Forces dealt the first blow to the Russian Army near Kiev. Now with the brutal winter coming, everyone says the war will stop. This is complete bullshit. The Ukrainian Armed Forces cannot find the Russian Army any weaker to turn the superiority it has gained to its advantage. Kiev seems to be aware of this, and the Ukrainian Armed Forces are nowadays destroying Russian military targets in the regions occupied by the Russian Army, giving them the apocalypse. There have been dozens of attacks in the last week. However, the most critical of these was the hitting of the most critical bridge connecting the city of Melitopol with Mariupol. This shows all of us the new target of the Ukrainian Armed Forces. I would like to make a point here that will attract your attention. First of all, as we mentioned at the very beginning, the ultimate goal of Ukraine is to liberate all its lands, including Crimea, and this is written on the last page. However, the page we are reading today is definitely like an adventure map, with clues that take us to the last page. So Melitopol is definitely the key to the road to Crimea on the last page, and today, the Commander-in-Chief of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, General Valery Zaluzhny, said that to reach the borders of Crimea, the Ukrainian defenders have to cover a distance of 84 kilometers from Melitopol, which is full fire control of the land corridor. Recall the beginning of the Kherson counter-offensive of the armed forces of Ukraine. The Ukrainian armed forces destroyed the supply lines sent to Kherson with similar HIMARS shots. We saw that all 3 critical bridges connecting the city of Kherson to the Crimea were hit by Ukrainian warriors. After imprisoning Russian soldiers in a hell cage, Kiev continued to bombard them with lightning bolts and then finished off with a ground operation. Now it looks like they will do the same in Melitopol. After separating the western part of the city of Melitopol from the east, the Ukrainian troops that will advance from Zaporizhia can easily carry out bombardment and ground operations. At this point, the harsh conditions brought by the winter will make it difficult for these operations to progress as quickly as in Kherson. However, these harsh conditions affect the Russians more than the Ukrainians. We should not forget this either. If we need to examine this operation a little more deeply, it will become clearer, in our opinion, as to whether it is possible or not. Let's dive deeper. The Ukrainian Armed Forces is currently sending pioneer troops to the region. In fact, the leading units of the Ukrainian Army are 20-year-old commandos from the notorious Chechen fighters fighting against Russia. The Russian Army, on the other hand, has more than a dozen regiments and brigades in the region between the west of the Dnieper River and Melitopol. However, in a period of about 10 months, the Russian Army lost at least half of its regiments and brigades here. Despite these losses, it is stated that the total number of Russian troops here is around 90,000. When the reports in the Melitopol region are examined, it is stated that the number of Russian soldiers in the region is between 20 to 30,000. The Ukrainian Armed Forces, on the other hand, seem to be about to cut these 30,000 Russian forces into the Devil's Triangle by breaking through the front line for 84 kilometers and imprison them in a hell cage. However, Russia is aware that this operation will be carried out and has already started artillery fire to disperse the Ukrainian troops. Russian and Ukrainian forces recently fired artillery against each other around Hulyapol and Polohy in the Zaporizhia Oblast, 170 kilometers northeast of Russian-occupied Melitopol in southern Ukraine. It is stated that the point that provoked this artillery duel was the high mobility in the Ukrainian armed forces. The Russian army leaned on the triggers of its artillery in order to respond as soon as possible. This move could be a sign that Ukraine's fourth counterattack may be imminent, despite the start of winter. This widely anticipated offensive aims to liberate much of southern Ukraine and push Ukrainian troops into the bottleneck connecting mainland Ukraine to the Crimean Peninsula, which Russian forces captured in 2014. The end of the Russian troops, who are completely stuck in this bottleneck, will be death, as in Kherson. Russian troops are currently weak in Zaporizhia. Since this spring, the area along the Hulyapol-Polohy axis has been frequented by separate brigade-sized Russian and Ukrainian troops. The 291st Guard Motor Rifle Regiment, which on paper had several thousand soldiers and a large number of armored vehicles on the Russian side, was stationed in this area. On the Ukrainian side, the 106th Regional Defense Brigade, a lightly equipped formation consisting of several thousand volunteers from the local area, occupied the area. The 19th Separate Rifle Battalion, a 400-strong active army unit, reinforces the regional brigade. Both sides have supporting artillery, and both sides are harassing each other. The conflict began with the discovery by Russian intelligence of the near-frontal movements of large mechanized forces of the Ukrainian army. The Russians suddenly woke up. They are aware of the incoming strong Ukrainian forces and do not want to show weakness. However, it is a fact that Ukraine's target is clearly Melitopol. It is unclear which Ukrainian mechanized force may have moved to Hulyapol in anticipation of a possible attack on Melitopol. However, Ukraine's 65th Mechanized Brigade and 1st Tank Brigade are located near Melitopol. A journey through Melitopol may require more than a few heavy brigades. Each of Ukraine's previous counterattacks around Kiev in March and around Kharkiv and Kherson 6 months later involved at least half a dozen heavy brigades. However, it should be noted here that Kiev did not carry out a decisive ground operation without the possibility of absolute victory. To liberate Melitopol, then turn right and liberate southern Kherson Oblast on the left bank of the Dnieper River, a Ukrainian force would need to advance 200 miles and defeat a dozen or more Russian brigades and regiments. From here on, the target will be slaughter. However, as we mentioned, this is a difficult road, and it is our duty to give them financial and moral support. Crimea has the power to destroy a great empire of fear. It was of the same strategic importance before, and it is still now. The Ukrainians have already made efforts to disperse some of these Russian units by first advancing to the right bank of the Dnipro and then landing special operations forces on the Kinburn Peninsula on the southern side of the river delta, where the Dnieper empties into the sea to land. But even if these forces are unable to risk taking action to respond to a possible Ukrainian attack northeast of Melitopol, they will still be on track for this attack, as the attack is hooked towards the mouth of the Dnipro and the land bridge with Crimea. At this point, Ukraine will carry out a similar preparation in Kherson, especially the invisibility provided by the winter months and the easier hunting of the aircraft by the defense systems will protect the secrecy of the preparation. Frankly, it would be a surprise to me that the army that succeeded in this in Kherson could not carry out the same operation order near Melitopol. At this point, Vasilivka and Orikhiv will serve as important stops. Control of the Dnieper River was completely removed from the Russians. The actions of the Ukrainian armed forces will now determine the course of progress in the region. The Russian army currently only has the strength to defend itself, but Russian President Vladimir Putin is already starting to gather his strength. He will gather his troops again in January and try to advance into Ukraine with a strong attack. With Russia determined in its imperial ambition to conquer Ukraine, it is not difficult to observe that Vladimir Putin is strengthening his troops ahead of a major offensive early next year. We can all see this. This is the reason why Putin continues the war. The Russian leader pursues his never-ending ambitions for Ukraine. This is the main reason why Bakhmut is the favorite battleground of the last days. By winning a victory, Putin wants to instill morale in his people and soldiers. Since being defeated in the northeast of Ukraine and forced to withdraw from the southern port city of Kherson, Russian forces have been fighting to strengthen their defensive positions along a front line stretching for hundreds of kilometers. Ukrainian forces continue to advance slowly in the south, but the most intense fighting is in the east, where Russian forces are attempting to capture the city of Bakhmut, and Moscow continues to send troops into the war. At the same time, Belarus, Ukraine's northern neighbor and the Kremlin's closest ally, ordered a surprise assessment of the combat readiness of its armed forces. Russia used Belarus as a jumping-off point for its invasion in February, and there are persistent concerns that Belarus could do so again, possibly with its own military joining. It is stated that there is no unit that will carry out an invasion attempt on the Belarusian border at the moment, but Ukraine should observe this border because a surprise attack from Belarus may suddenly disperse the forces of the Ukrainian armed forces, and the divided power may suffer a heavy defeat as Russia experienced after the partition in Kharkiv-Kherson. We will continue to share our deep analyses with you by smelling the air of the war. Keep following us.